Saints Row was a game that some people played. Saints Row 2 was really good. Saints Row the Third revolutionized video game technology with the big floppy dildo weapon. Saints Row 4 was a superhero game haphazardly stitched onto Saints Row the Third, with aliens in the Matrix. This franchise hungered for a bullet in its mouth. It desperately needed to be taken behind the barn and rebooted. But Volition had one more half-decent rope to shoot before they whiffed on their next game. And from their turgid member came Shat Out of Hell. Now that's a video game. It's got Satan, my main man downstairs. He's hanging out, controlling the Democrats. Big fan of his work. The open world of Hell isn't another rehash of Steelport. And it has some fun characters who don't really factor into the story, like DJ William Shakespeare, Dracula, both voiced by Liam O'Brien, very efficient, Sad Blackbeard, and Satan's daughter. They should have just used this concept for Saints Row 4. I did some digging, and the fourth game was originally supposed to be an expansion for the third, cheekily called Enter the Dominatrix. It was gonna be a thin-stretched Matrix joke where you'd fight a Godzilla-sized energy drink named Paul. Good stuff. However, they decided to scale it up into a full game, kept the Matrix framework, changed the villains into aliens, and later released the original concept as DLC. There's a lot going on in that game. You get superpowers straight out of Prototype, but those kinda made the cars and guns feel obsolete. It's fun, sure, but being in a slightly altered version of the city from the previous game just wasn't doing it for me. There just wasn't much of a narrative or stakes. The humor was a bit forced, and it felt like a sandbox mod more than a full game. I don't know. My therapist Frank says I shouldn't focus on the negative so much. But he also wears a bunny suit and keeps telling me the world's gonna end. Plus I've never seen his diploma. I'll just say that Saints Row 4 wasn't for me. Going to the Christian hell and getting Lucifer's halo fit better into this franchise as an excuse for superpowers than Alien Matrix. Also helps that you can actually fly in this one instead of just gliding. Kinsey here really sums up my thoughts on the flying mechanic.
This is bad for my OCD.
Saints Row 4 had these cluster thingies you'd collect like Crackdown orbs, and you'd exchange every 10 or so for superpower upgrades. This is some pure black tar heroin shit. My brain would scream at me every time I tore myself away from the endless cluster collectathon to go do a mission. Fuck the missions. Maybe the next cluster will finally make me happy. No? It didn't? Well, surely the next one will.
I hope there's not something ridiculous like 100 of these to find.
Ha! No, Johnny. You sweet, sweet summer child. There are 940 of them. So I'm flying around, grabbing all the candy, and the game is just dumping all these side quests and activities on me. You've got a couple of what can charitably be called story segments or cutscenes, some free-roaming challenges, and loyalty missions for the people trying to rebel against Satan. All of which really amount to the same set of mini-games in different districts. Mercifully, most of these are quick little jaunts that break up the tactical cluster collecting action. But you gotta do 'em to get cash so you can upgrade these fucking guns that initially feel like they're barely spraying piss on enemies. The real meta here is to max out the stomp attacks upgrades and spam that shit on everything so you can get back to finding clusters as soon as humanly possible. What few cutscenes there are fucking unhinged. This is some primo bungo shit right here. Satan kidnaps the president/player character from the last games through a Ouija board, planning to marry them off to his daughter Jezebel. Johnny Gat and Kinsey Kensington follow down to hell somehow, where they team up with this slimy corpo fuck the Saints killed in the second game, and they start destabilizing the Devil's operations, whatever those are. You can freely switch between playing as Johnny or Kinsey for most of the game, though it does force you to fight Satan as Johnny in the end, which simplifies things, I suppose. Johnny's sort of always been a shallow mascot in my mind, so it's kind of neat to play as him and pretend he's growing as a character. He's not, but he quips and he riffs, so it's something. Kinsey is... well, she exists. Used to be FBI, she's into kinky shit, she hackermans. They did more with her in the third game. She had agoraphobia and she actually talked, but in this game she's just the girl. So she's my favorite character. She's best girl. She's also one of the only women left alive, so not a tough decision. Anyway, all of a sudden it cuts to Satan and Jezebel bursting into a barely rhyming Disney musical number.
You think because you're my daughter, you think that you're above it all.
This goes on way too long, but somehow my initial revulsion turned into enjoyment when Kinsey and Johnny start singing totally separately in their own scene.
But all my solutions involve murder sprees.
You have to stay the course and kill without remorse.
Okay, for context,
Look at this graph.
this graph illustrates my taste in media. It's a bell curve. If something is mediocre to mid, I usually couldn't give a fuck less about it. You give me some finely tuned masterpiece type shit, I recognize it and I'm swoonin'. But if you sit me down in front of pure trash, the aborted drex, the unintentionally hilarious, or the disastrous shit, I'm in heaven, flopping around in the mud like the filthy little piggy I am. Sometimes they force me to use these shitty guns when I'm just trying to fly around and get my cluster nut. I have mixed feelings. I didn't sign up for a third-person shooter. This is a superhero game, goddammit. They should have thrown in some infamous pew-pew hand lasers to replace the guns because the guns don't play well with the powers. If you use the super sprint, flight, or other powers in the middle of combat, you have to wait a few seconds for the animations to reset before you can pull out your dick. I mean your gun. There's an upgrade that allows the use of powers while hovering, but you can't fire a rocket down at the poor misunderstood demons. The power mechanics are quite literally just layered on top of the core gameplay, which you can also see in how scrotum-shrivelingly slow you move by default. The story flies by at a breakneck speed, and it'll toss cutscenes at you after certain completion percentages have been reached. Game actually calls itself out at one point, saying Jezebel will hit you up after an arbitrary amount of time has passed. Fantastic. Satan randomly decides his daughter should be married off to Johnny instead because of the initiative he showed in fucking up his whole shit. And I'm just like, I did most of that shit with Kinsey though. You'd think Satan would be psyched about gay stuff, and if you loaded up a female boss from Saints Row 4, this would have been a gay marriage anyway. You then crash the wedding you're supposed to be a part of, knock out a blue-collar boss fight that becomes trivialized by the aura power freezing all enemies in place, including the big man himself, and you're treated to a Mass Effect 3/Deus Ex Human Revolution ending Tron 666. They really cut some corners by using storybook segments for most of the cutscenes. And after beating Satan 5 times and seeing all of the endings, I think they just wanted this shit over and done with. The ending that comes the closest to being a canon lead-in to the 2022 game is this one where God, voiced by Nathan Fillion, retcons the entire series and remakes Earth. We go out on a scene of Johnny and Kinsey working as cops, and the new world serves as the setting for this game no one played. It seems that they didn't use it again in the reboot aside from Easter eggs. The other endings are similarly short and stupid. Johnny goes to heaven and reunites with his girlfriend Aisha, who got decapitated in Saints Row 2. She doesn't say a word and they make out. Roll credits. That one's kinda sweet, but it essentially dooms the remnants of humanity to float around in space with their dicks and/or clits in their hands. There's a half-assed one where Johnny takes Satan's place as the ruler of hell. He and the Corpo dude, whose name I cannot and will not remember, talk about how cool hell is, and how Johnny will see his friends again eventually. This quarter-assed one shows Kinsey discovering a habitable planet full of warlike natives they can go do a genocide on, and Johnny thanks God. Finally, you've got an utterly assless one where Johnny learns all the secrets of the universe, including how to make a perfect lobster bisque, and he's just like, oh. Cut and print. There's also a secret ending about the side characters, but it's barely worth mentioning because those guys barely exist. None of these are good, but I'll be magnanimous and say these endings are the perfect way to wrap up the saga. Low-effort jokes that are kind of fun. I remember enjoying Saints Row the Third. You got a sense that you were building a criminal empire from the ground up. In a perfect world, they would have just done Shat Out of Hell instead of 4 and left it in the oven for longer. Instead of screwing 2 glorified expansions onto the bones of the last fully fleshed out game, they could have worked on incorporating the old gameplay into the new stuff. Maybe put some wacky GTA Online vehicles in there so the whole driving mechanic wasn't totally ignored. I also would have been less annoyed with reusing Steelport if Hell was doing the invading, provided that the new area from this game was slapped in below it. Would have been interesting to see the leftovers of the other gangs fighting with demons and shit, because the husks roaming around in Hell are painfully uninspired and boring. But those are basically all of my thoughts on this thing. It's over in a few hours and it wasn't the worst game I've ever played. 9 out of 10. Sure hope they didn't fuck up the reboot. They probably fucked up the reboot.